We went to a carnival they had going on. Try the food, just do all the things, just kind of see what your feeling is. And I always do say, if all things are equal, go with your gut feeling. And it's so true. We all did that. We all had the same feeling. We're like, the other place was further away. It was beautiful. The food was good, but it just didn't have that gut feeling for us. And this place, it checked all the boxes. So we're like, yes, we're in. Welcome to Aging in Style with Lori Williams, the podcast all about finding the silver lining no matter what life throws your way. I'm Lori Williams, an award-winning senior living expert, author, educator, and caregiver to my husband, Mark. Join me as I share insights, tips, and personal stories to help you navigate the world of senior housing, discover ways to pay for care, advocate for your loved ones, and most importantly, learn how to thrive, not just survive, as you age. Hi, welcome to Aging in Style. All right, I have been on kind of my own little personal journey the past 3-4 months, helping my mother and her husband move to assisted living and memory care. So I've kind of been reflecting on this because we've just sort of like reached the finish line, and that my mom moved this past weekend into her apartment in assisted living. So I've been sort of reflecting on things, and I thought this would be an interesting podcast to record because I want to share what I've learned being on the other side of the move. And these are like the 6 lessons that I have learned. And what's interesting, they really are the things that I have preached on this podcast since I started the podcast, and that I have been saying for the almost 20 years that I've been doing senior placement. However, it is different on the other side. And so I am really thankful to have this perspective now as a family searching for senior living. A little different than being the advisor. Not that I don't have empathy and can, truly imagine what it's like. It's different when it's you. So let's talk about this and sort of just the cliff notes on it, because I have shared some on the podcast since all this began. But basically, my mother and her husband have been living in Mississippi, I guess for 6 years, maybe 5-6 years, something like that. They moved there from Louisiana because both of my brothers live in Mississippi, and I live in Texas, and my stepfather's not a fan of Dallas, so they didn't want to come here. So that's how they ended up in Mississippi, and they're close to both of my brothers, which is wonderful. They're there to help. But Joe, as people do in their 80s, he has seen decline and, started off, I think, really when he had open heart surgery right before COVID, or maybe I think it was like January 2020. So like seriously, right before the world went crazy. And so since then, he has been in a decline with, some dementia, mobility issues. And it just, as it happens, it suddenly just really accelerated earlier this summer. And my mom had a caregiver there, but she is worn out. She's in her 80s also. And, it was a lot on her. They really wanted to stay in their home, which most people do. And I totally get that. We honor that. However, they had reached the point where it was just too much. And my mom was saying the things to me that clients say. I'm overwhelmed. I don't get enough sleep. I'm stressed. I don't have a life of my own. I can't leave him. I don't feel like I can go anywhere. I feel that he is solely, I am responsible for him. And so that's a difficult place to be. So I flew down there and we looked at some places. And of course, if y'all know my story, it's hard for me to travel because I am the caregiver for my husband, who's a stroke survivor. So I'll kind of weave that into this whole story that, for me, there has been a lot of guilt that I can't be there, or I wasn't there to help with either of the moves, because what they needed, they were in 2 separate, completely different places. My stepfather needed memory care, and my mother is assisted living, or quite honestly, she could be independent living. She's doing great, but she wanted to be there by him. They can't be in the same apartment, but because that would not be healthy for her being in memory care when she doesn't have dementia. But, we found a very good situation. So I'm going to get into all of that, but that's kind of like the cliff notes and just catching everyone up. But along the way, I have recorded some podcasts that were related to this, and we'll put them in the show notes. But they're number 254, which was They Canceled the Caregiver. Oh, that's a good one to listen to. And number 256, which was Paperwork You Need Before Moving to Assisted Living or Memory Care. Also really good, important information. So let's start off. Okay, tip number 1, plan in advance. And we tell people this all the time, but again, most people don't want to think about leaving because they're so convinced they're staying in their home forever, which again, I understand. I am kind of in that same boat because my goal is keep my husband home as long as I possibly can. I hope that forever I'll be able to keep him at home. But, things can happen, as with this situation, with my mom's husband, is that, dementia, he's declining, mobility, started having falls. It was just a lot on her. So we say plan in advance because waiting lists are real. And depending where you are, your area, and there may not be as many places to choose from or as many, let me just say, quality places. And so here in Dallas, you might have to go out of your city if there's something full, but you're going to find something pretty good because there's a lot of choice because this is a huge metroplex. But Gulfport, Biloxi, Mississippi, there's not a whole lot of places. So we did connect, which was really kind of cool. We connected with a me in Mississippi, and he was very, very kind and very knowledgeable. And we went and looked at a couple of places. And what I think it came down for me and my brothers and my mother also was that, they were lovely, nice communities. But what was most important was being close to my brother, not being 30 minutes away, because, if there was something that would happen, a hospitalization, an emergency in the night, anything like that, it was much easier for my brother to be able to get there quickly and not to have to drive 30 minutes. And then I have another brother, and it would have been probably, an hour for him. So we really needed to find a place that was close and that at least someone could be there in a few minutes if needed. So thankfully, one of the communities that we kept coming back to was perfect. It was right by my brother's house. We got to visit. We got to see activities going on. It was a very vibrant community. And we got to meet a lot of the residents. And these are all the things that I tell people to do. Go to an event. We went to a carnival they had going on. Try the food. Just do all the things. Just kind of see what your feeling is. And I always do say, if all things are equal, go with your gut feeling. And it's so true. We all did that. We all had the same feeling. We're like, the other place was further away. It was beautiful. The food was good, but it just didn't have that gut feeling for us. And this place, it checked all the boxes. So we're like, yes, we're in. We love this place, but there was a waiting list. Wonk, wonk, wonk. So first, what was of highest priority was to get Joe moved in because he was declining and we needed to get him in memory care. It was truly becoming too much, and my mom was having to get caregivers 24/7, which is very expensive. So luckily, we went on the wait list and they got him in about 3 weeks. They were able to say, okay, we have availability. He got a great apartment. So that worked out wonderfully. So he was moved into memory care. Next, my mom had to be on the waiting list to get into assisted living. What happened is this is not the apartment she wanted. It's small. It's a studio. But as we tell people all the time, you go on the waiting list for the first thing that comes available. If this is where you want to be, and if you're in a situation where you're assisted living and your husband or wife is memory care, then you're just going to have to do what you have to do. So my mom took the studio and moved in this past weekend, and that moves her up on the waiting list because she lives there now. When a 1-bedroom comes available, then she can slide into that one. And so that's how it works. And we tell people all the time. But listen, if you don't want to find yourself in this kind of situation, let's talk, let's figure out what's going to work for you, and let's start visiting communities now, because it's so important to make those plans in advance. And planning early really does give you choices and peace of mind. And if possible, don't wait till there's an emergency, because it just adds that extra level of stress. And I know I'm going to tell you that, and I tell everyone this, and you're going to go, Lori, your family waited till there was an emergency. And yes, indeed, they did, but it is what it is. Tip number 2, be on the same page with your siblings. This is so important, and I have counseled so many families over the last almost 20 years, and there have been many that were on the same page and many that weren't. And it made it just so much more difficult. If you have a daughter in Dallas and a brother in, say, Atlanta, and another sister somewhere in California, and no one wants them to move. They're maybe the daughter in Dallas is we have to move them because everything's falling on me. And the other siblings are no, they're fine. That is so difficult. And I've seen that many, many times. Thankfully, my brothers and I were on the same page. And I am proud of us. I mean, we all get along, but I have 2 brothers, Eric and Craig. Shout out to them, because we're all 3 were on the same page. We needed to get this done and be there for my mom. And we did it. So, I will admit that I have some guilt, because the bulk of everything fell on them. I flew in for 4 days, looked at communities, helped decide which one, kind of started the paperwork, made a list for my mom of what needed to be done. But that was my contribution. And, to answer any questions that I could from here in Texas. But I do feel guilty that the bulk of it fell on my brothers and my sister-in-law, and they had to go through the house. They had to do the first load, move everything into memory care for Joe, and then they had to go back and do everything assisted living for my mom. And, I wish I could have been there to help with that. But again, tip 2, be on the same page with your siblings, and it makes life much easier. Tip number 3, go with your gut. And I mentioned this earlier in Plan in Advance. When all things being equal, on paper, communities can look perfect. Pricing's great, location, care, amenities, maybe everything's great. You've checked all the boxes. But what is the difference? And the difference is sort of that gut feeling you get with the staff that you meet and the people who are running the show, the culture of the community, the atmosphere, the longevity of staff, things like that tell you a lot about a community. One of the things that really sold me is when we were in the memory care looking at it and thinking about Joe, we went into the apartment that would be his, and there was a sweet lady who was living there, but she was going to go back to her home. And I saw the caregiver just so kind with her, and she said, Miss, whatever her name was, say Betsy, Miss Betsy, these people are just going to look in here, very quickly. And she was just so loving and kind, and it was genuine. You could see it, how genuine this caregiver was with this lady. And I just thought, yeah, this is it. This is what I want for Joe. I want the best for him. I want him to be cared for and, looked at like this caregiver was looking at and caring for this sweet lady. So, that can't be taught. I think it just has to be within a person that it is their calling to be a caregiver because, shout out to caregivers. That is the hardest job in the world. It's hard to take care of someone, your own loved one, but taking care of someone else's loved one, I think that would be maybe more difficult. I don't know. I've not been in that situation. Just had to care for my own loved one. So again, like all things being equal, just go with your gut. Go with your instincts. What feels right to you? And you'll know, it's different for everyone. Tip number 4, and this one's really important, and I've mentioned this many times on different episodes of the podcast, but set expectations. Assisted living and memory care they're not perfect. Things are going to happen. There are going to be bumps. We had bumps in the road. We had things happen, and it's okay, but you have to be prepared for that. You can't go in thinking this is going to be just everything's going to go perfectly. It's going to be smooth. I mean, things will happen. Maybe paperwork isn't gotten, signed and isn't back in time. It's not on your timeline. You want it to get moved in 2 days, but the paperwork can't be finalized for 4 days. You're going to get moved in, and maybe, for instance, my mom moved into her assisted living, and the first night there was a vent over her bed that was just blowing all night, and she was freezing, and she did not have a good night's sleep. Those things are going to happen. Things are not going to be perfect. And I think we have to set those expectations. Also, early on, Joe had a couple of falls, and what wasn't clear was that of course, they're in the middle of the night, and he was sent out by ambulance to the emergency room, which is typical protocol. He hit his head in one of them. I mean, thankfully, he has not been severely injured in any of these falls. But again, in memory care, wherever you are, no one is going to assure you 100% that they're not going to fall. Because you can fall anywhere. You could be like standing right in front of you and someone could fall. So nobody can make you that guarantee. And I think it's really important that you know that going in. Joe was falling at home more frequently than he's falling in memory care, but he did have a fall. And so they sent him, as I said, as protocol, they sent him to the emergency room in the middle of the night. What was not understood was that when that happens, the family has to go. Of course, you're going to go up there anyhow, but you provide the transportation, bring him back to the memory care. And that's pretty standard. And so, there's so much information coming at you when you move into an assisted living or a memory care that I get it, that not everything is going to sink in and you're going to remember it. And as a family member now, I really get it because I know a lot of this stuff, but it's also, there's so much emotion that you're processing. It's not an easy thing to go through. And especially if it's your mother who's in her 80s, she's processing a lot. She's giving up the care of her husband. Even though it's going to be better for her, it's still a difficult and emotional process. So again, just very important to set those expectations and expect bumps in the road. They're going to happen. Which brings me to tip number 5. Communication is key. And yes, I have shared this before. Communication is key, but I really am feeling it now as a family member, how important it is. So that vent blowing on my mom. I called her, hey, how was your first night's sleep? Terrible. I'm like, okay. Nobody wants to hear that, right? Okay, what's going on? Well, this vent was blowing on me all night. And she was upset. But I said, did you call someone? You need to let them know. Yes, I did tell. So someone came. They fixed it. It's not blowing on her. It was easy fix, and she's okay. But those are things that some people will just kind of like hang on to and be mad and not ask for help. You have to communicate. Another thing that just happened yesterday is in assisted living. And this goes to, I guess, mostly communication, but kind of expectation too, that when you're in assisted living and you leave, you need to sign out. And the reason is that they want to know where you are because they are accountable for you. And my mom still drives, and she left yesterday to go back to her house because they still own their home, and they've been thankfully able to that makes it a much easier process. She can just kind of go and get things that she wants and bring them in. And so she did not sign out. And so they called my brother saying, hey, where's your mom? And so he had to tell her, listen, when you leave, you have to sign out. And she's like, why do I have to sign out? She was not happy about that because she truly is very independent. But that's the rule. And so communication, again, is key. Mom, you have to sign out when you leave the assisted living. And I know in a way that maybe feels like an invasion of privacy to her, but also it's a good thing. I mean, somebody needs to know where you are, right? I mean, if I'm 86 years old, Sorry, Mom, if I'm saying the wrong age, but I think she's 86. If I'm 86 years old and I'm driving around, I want people to know where I am in case something happens, right? So again, communication is the key here. And any kind of misunderstandings, need to be talked about. My mom, when they told her there was an apartment ready for her and that it was a studio, she kept calling it just a little room. And there was so much going on when we were moving, Joe in, of course, he was first, that she did not realize how small her apartment would be. And so again, communication and setting the expectation that, yes, it is small, it is a studio, but you are on the wait list to go to a 1-bedroom. And also, please remember, we don't want you sitting in this room all day. The whole point of being in assisted living is to use all the wonderful amenities and to go and visit Joe in the memory care and go have your meals and make friends and go on outings. We picked this community because of how active they are and how many fun things they have going on. And it's gorgeous. There's a pond and an area, like a walking trail or walking path around the pond. There's horses. There's a barn. It's absolutely stunning. So, I'm like, you have this whole community at your disposal. Don't get caught up in that you just have a room. It is an apartment, but it is small. It's a studio apartment. So making sure we're clear and communicating and setting those expectations. So tip 6, and this is my final tip for you. Financial planning is a gift that you give your kids. And I know it's not always easy to plan for these things. And I just want to say, kudos to my mom and Joe for planning. They have or had purchased long-term care policies. Joe had saved a lot of money through the years so that they would be able to be taken care of in their later years. And senior living is expensive. It's expensive for one person, let alone 2 people. And I am, as the adult child, I am thankful that they did that they planned it, and that they did their estate planning. And we all kind of knew what they had, so that made it much easier. And, a lot of families that I talk to, they have no clue what parents have, what the financial situation is, what their wishes are. And a lot of times they don't have the financial resources, and the kids may be in a position where they either have to find a way to help financially, or maybe they're staying home and kind of cobbling something together. And, sometimes it's just not a great situation. I've seen all of it over the almost 20 years I've been doing this. So it's very important. And I think be thankful to your parents if they did plan accordingly and they saved. It makes a huge difference. And it is not a blessing that I take lightly. I'm very thankful for that. So these are my 6 tips that I have learned from the other side. And I feel like this experience truly gives me more empathy for what other families I'm working with are going through. And like I said, I feel like I've always kind of understood it, but it's a little different, or it's way different when you're on the other side of it, just as it's way different when you're on the side of actually being a caregiver for a loved one. Nobody can really prepare you for that. So this is a little bit of the same. So those tips, I just want to go over again. Tip 1, plan in advance. Tip 2, be on the same page with siblings. Tip 3, go with your gut with all things being equal. Tip 4, set expectations. Tip 5, communication is key. And tip 6, financial planning is a gift. All right. Thank you for listening. And my hope is that, in sharing this will give you some encouragement and maybe a little peace of mind if you're facing this journey yourself. And also, if you're not quite there yet, to begin preparing and having those difficult conversations with your parents. I'm thankful that, like I said, we'd had those conversations and everyone was on the same page, and we did this pretty smoothly, or as smoothly as something like this can be done. All right, guys, thanks for listening, and check out the show notes for the other podcasts that I mentioned that tie back into this. And as always, Share this podcast with your friends and family, neighbors, whoever. You never know who needs this information. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast. That way you will be alerted every Friday when a new one is available. All right, thanks. We'll talk to you next week.